Child Protective Services workers. What was the worst case you've seen? I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a nonprofit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected, or mistreated. Mind you, I worked at the shelter 10 plus years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I got a call one night, worked graveyard, about two male sibling groups coming in. They'd been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest is 11 and the other is 9. I started reading their case file, and there's a long history of neglect. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid, aggressive. He ends up pulling a weapon on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently, the mom, who was a user, was misusing the 11-year-old so she could get money. They would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it on substance to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her or his younger brother. By the time the kid turned 12, he had been expelled from 3 different elementary schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, Mom lost custody, and the last I heard is they were placed in foster care. Story 2. Never worked for CPS or the like, but there's a kid I've wondered about for a long time. When I was pregnant with my first spawn, over a decade ago, there was a girl who often had appointments around the same time as me. She was always there with what I assume were her mother and grandmother, and if that girl was a day over 11 years old, I'd be taken aback. She was so little and massively pregnant, and she still wore her bright, simple kid clothes and glittery shoes. I'll always wonder how the hell she ended up pregnant so young and how life has turned out for her thus far. That is heartbreaking and messed up. Story 3. Not CPS, but I worked in partnership with them. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far, far too many cases to be safe. I witnessed a mistreatment of a child. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state did not move them into foster care because they were too old and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. I had an 11-year-old threaten to end it all and refuse a safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They did not come out because if she didn't have a safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that could take her. If they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. I had a bio father return to the home after prison time for mistreating his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of tell the parents he couldn't return. There was likely a return to the mistreatment. The state did not want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. I had a client with birth defects because he and his mother were the product of an inappropriate relationship. He was following the pattern of aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being mistreated. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with substance misuse and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your habits fooling you. Story 4. I worked with a girl who got pregnant at 12. The man had known her since she was 8, been dating her since she was 10, and they were married when she was 16 because they were worried he was going to be deported. I knew from the start that she was a young mother, but the horrifying details of the situation came out over the months that I worked there. The absolute most terrifying part was that she was so freaking happy. She was convinced that this was the greatest way that her life could have turned out. She was ecstatic to be a young mother and bride, and overall she was one of the happiest people that I ever met. But every once in a while she would slip and I could see how miserable she was. I felt so sorry for her and considered calling the cops multiple times, and not doing so is one of the biggest regrets I have in my life. Especially after I met the adoring husband. He had such a terrible aura around him, and the entire time he was around, all I wanted to do was punch every tooth out of his terrible head. The worst part was that her parents sanctioned everything, and by her account, were totally okay with the entire situation. I am not gonna lie, that was a very hard read. And I, too, want to punch every tooth out of his terrible head. Story 5. My case was slightly different from what many would think can be the worst. I had a report about an incorrigible child. Pretty normal stuff. Parents tried everything, but they cannot control their child and are worried about the safety of other children. This particular case was slightly different. The child and her 2 siblings were adopted by the grandparents. The grandparents stated that the one child, let's say her name was Ellen, was threatening to hurt her sibling and actually went as far as to chase him around with a weapon. Ellen was a 12-year-old at the time of this report. After further investigation and services with the family, I learned the full reason for the original adoption. When Ellen was younger, about 6, with her mother, she was being mistreated by the mother's boyfriend. When Ellen's mother found out about the mistreatment, she terminated the boyfriend in front of Ellen and had Ellen help her clean up the mess. Now comes the grandparents, unable to figure out why Ellen is troubled now. After talking to Ellen more, she was angry at her younger sibling for being normal, as he was also present for the termination, but too young to remember. As I last kept up with the family, the grandparent and siblings left Ellen behind and moved to another state. Ellen is currently living with a foster family and is doing much better. Damn, your own family abandoning you? I hope they rot. Story 6. Late to contribute, but thought I would add. I'm a neurosurgeon, not a CPS worker. The case was mistreatment. The true disgust, however, is when you consider the mechanics that result in the degree of injury. The child is flexible but weak. Both hips were dislocated. The orifices are obviously too small for such, so they were severely torn. I've been in neurosurgery for over 10 years now, and this was the only time I let out a tear and retched violently. It did not survive. I did not have the heart to follow up on the perpetrator, for I feared my reaction if I were to learn he got away or if I did not agree with the punishment. You know what? Hot take, but the penalty should be back. Story 7. Firstly, not as harrowing as some of the other tales here. Secondly, not CPS. My girlfriend works in a school and is well-read in child development and works closely with social services, etc. for child welfare. She told me the story of one young boy whose father was cruel to him and mom. Mom was a user and suspected street worker. Little boy is often picked up from school by grandma but lives with mom. Several things escalate, and my girlfriend learns that the little boy was taken from his mom as she has resumed an on-and-off relationship with cruel father and has been placed in foster care temporarily. In an attempt to put a positive spin on things and maintain a sense of normality, she asked the little boy what his new bedroom was like. It's warm. At my mom's, I was always cold. That is heartbreaking. Story 8. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after-hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered offender at 12. It was heartbreaking. It was a blended family and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to intimacy by her bio dad. Anyway, one night one of the kids said, "The girl's name touched my thing." The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS in their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed in the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with our siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties because she was an offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot and I always wonder what happened to their family. That is the dumbest thing I've heard. You can clearly still teach the child wrong from right. What was the judge on? He should be in jail with a father. Story 9. Not a CPS worker, but was a mistreated child. My mom's husband began mistreating me at 13. This continued nightly until I finally called the cops at 17. The CPS agent was so calm and comforting amidst all the drama. Told me no matter what, I could call her and she would be there for me. Anyway, the cops told me I was a witch and asked for it. My mom never believed me. I ended up living in an abandoned house for 5 months until I gave in and went back. Put a deadbolt on my door. He started mistreating me when I was 18 because I was legal now. I'm 25. Still jump when I hear things behind me. Still have nightmares and extreme anxiety. My mom is still married to him. Even after watching him roughing the crap out of my younger brother and knowing he was mistreating me, she believes I seduced him. He's a user now and will probably ruin my mom's life. I wish every day I'd called that kind CPS agent. She warned me that may happen. Some people just don't deserve to be here on Earth anymore, you know? Story 10. One of my uncles was a CPS worker for a good amount of time before he just couldn't do it anymore, and I can remember 2 cases that he brought up while at a get-together. Mom was sending her 6 to 8-year-old daughter over the border to Mexico on a bus where she would be picked up by kitty fiddlers who would keep her for a few hours before sending her back with payment. Dad was mistreating his 16-year-old son to the point that he had developed a defense mechanism that involved crapping on himself to keep his dad away. He ended up having to wear adult diapers after CPS took him because his defense mechanism became his go-to for whenever he felt scared. Well, that's another one. Story 11. Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home, so we've known the specifics and assisted in a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby, and despite being in high school, I worked up to feed him. The mother was a teenage pregnancy who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes, and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed, she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything, and we got regular updates. Child is 2 now, very happy and loved. Another case where we called CPS. The mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare, her oldest son and 3 daughters. Oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant, again, when she was obviously below the poverty line. Baby was born, her kids got progressively more and more dirty to the point my mom reached out in a Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They'd get dropped off, she would bathe them all and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She just kept saying this is her 5th child and she's a single mom and a new baby. It's hard. Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly. After 3 days with him, my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with him, but I remember they came to pick some things up, and I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the worker's car all crying. It's hard, but it's better for them in the end. Story 12. Not CPS, but an ex-psychiatric caseworker. Even though I dealt with adults by extension, I also dealt with their kids when things got bad, such as witnessing a client's 9-year-old trying to light a smoke in the alley behind their triple-decker leading to a DCYF, our state's equivalent to CPS, phone call. 12 or 13-year-old sister of kid mentioned above who got in fistfight with mother. My client about servicing some of the mom's male customers. You know the kind. And ending up pregnant. Another DCYF phone call. So many others, but those stand out because unfortunately the client ended up jumping off the top floor of a high-rise a few years back, and I saw the aftermath of that. She wasn't my client at the time, but I was visiting another person in the building when it happened. Not a pleasant picture. Story 13. I was fortunate in that I never had to deal with a child's passing. The case that still haunts me is an 11-year-old girl in a psychiatric hospital after having hallucinations and ideations. Her family's case file was 2 inches thick. Her grandfather mistreated her. Later on, she was mistreated by the nice friendly neighbor whom her father asked to pick her up from school, who just happened to be a registered offender. When I got her case, she was perping on her much younger half-brother, in addition to the hallucinations and thoughts of ending it all. Her father was a lousy piece of crap who couldn't be fixed to actually work and provide for his family, and her stepmother hated her. At one point, I almost had her father persuaded to place her in a wonderful group home, but he then changed his mind. I'll never forget when he called me and proudly told me he'd spend 4 hours on the phone, but finally found a charity who would pay for his daughter's prescriptions. I tried to get her out of that home. We couldn't offer any services because, as evidenced by the 2-inch thick file, their family had every service available and nothing had changed. I reviewed it with my supervisor and legal, and they would not approve it because she was not in immediate danger. So it wasn't a problem that she was mistreating her younger brother, and her thoughts didn't consist of immediate danger. I dream about her every once in a while and wonder if she's still alive. Story 14. I was a case manager for CPS. I had a toddler in my caseload who came to care because of severe harming that left her with a fracture and 2 broken femur bones. She was in a full body cast. She was in medical foster care. The mission of the agency was to have children reunify with their parents. So the parents had to complete a case plan and attend court hearings. It took a while, but the parents completed the case plan and the child was reunified. During this time, Mom became pregnant again with a baby boy. She delivered around the same time the reunification occurred. The parents found the baby boy one morning. He was 6 weeks old and the same age his sister was when she came into care, and he had the same injuries. Before the reunification and the birth, I did everything I could to prevent either child from going back to that house. I even begged and cried in court. Dad was a suspect, but there was not enough evidence. He was a true monster. I waited 2 weeks, put in my notice, and walked out. There's so much injustice in that story. It's sad. Story 15. Before I worked as a social worker, I was direct care staff at a group home for teenage girls. One girl, B, was battling substance and drinking fixation. She was only 13 years old at the time and had been placed with us through a treatment program. She lived about 40 minutes away from the group home, and the goal was to remove her access to her fixations while providing support. B and I had discussed her major triggers for using, and she mentioned her relationship with her mother was a major stressor. That night, I heard firsthand how bad things were. During a phone call, on speaker so we could monitor, I listened to this woman scream at her daughter for no reason. I stepped in and ended the call as B ran upstairs to her room. The mother called back and continued her rant. I handed the phone to my supervisor and went to find B. I found her in her closet, crying on the floor. She didn't want to talk, but she leaned on me and cried. I gave her some space and went back downstairs to talk to my supervisor. Within a few minutes, B had left the group home. She had no stop order. We couldn't physically stop her from leaving and apologized as she ran off. We called the police and reported her AWOL. When I left that night, she hadn't returned. The following day, I go to the group home and was happy to see B had come back on her own. He notified her mom of her return. Mom called the town police and demanded B come home. She and the officers arrived and B refused to go. Mom tells B in front of everyone that she won't lock you in your room as long, and I promise that I'll feed you this time. We were shocked, but no one had any legal power to refuse B going back to this horrible situation. We were all powerless as she left back into the care of her cruel mother. B left me a poem that I still have nearly 12 years later. My heart hurts just wondering what happened to her. No one heard from her after that day. Some people just don't deserve to be parents. Story 16. I just read this entire thread and all its awful stories and good supportive comments. I'm a retired nurse of over 40 years. I have stories of my own I try to forget. My nurse friends have stories I know about that I'm trying to forget. Why did I read this tonight? It makes me feel like all the good I have tried to do in my life as a nurse and a decent woman does not even begin to scratch the surface of what goes on in the world. No, I could not take on the world, certainly not Texas or even California where my entire nursing career took place. I took care of what was in front of me. A lot of people just flat out suck, and those people should not have children. Exactly. Story 17. A close friend of mine used to work for CPS, and I've heard quite a few of her stories. There was one where a woman had twin babies and was spiked out of her mind one night and put bleach in her baby's bathwater instead of soap. Gave them some good burns, I think, and they were later removed from the home. There was also a case that was widely heard around here where a girl's boyfriend put her baby under because she was crying. Sad part about it is he wasn't even on anything. Just an evil man. There's also something going on where I work right now, in a school system where I heard of a family with 5 children. Oldest one being in 1st grade, 2 in kindergarten, and the other 2 infants. Where the parents are so worthless that the eldest brother, 1st grade, has to get the other 2 up and dressed in the mornings because the parents are still asleep. Contemplated calling CPS, but I've been told it's almost worthless because we don't have proof of them being neglected. It's just so sad to think of what some kids go through at home. The system sucks. Indeed it does. Story 18. This is not CPS, but a very similar issue. I did an internship with an organization that helped victims. It was seriously horrific. I cannot understand how any human can treat another human in these horrific manners. I will share the worst case without too much detail. A 14-year-old girl from a Southern American country was rescued in part of a raid in a forced labor rescue operation. The laborer situation was bad enough, but the girl was held in a trailer and was provided to the workers for intimacy. The room had a mattress, a nightstand with paper towels, and a teddy bear. When I heard the details, I threw up. I originally wanted a career in human rights. This case broke me. I realized I did not have the emotional capacity required. Felt a lot of guilt after my decision to change track, but I also know I'm no good to victims when I was so emotionally disturbed and wrapped up. I still do advocacy from a distance as a private person. I try to help people understand the horrors, and I try to keep an eye out for possible situations. But I can't be directly involved like I was. Humanity is truly terrifying. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 19. A kid with bruises that came in shapes and covered his body, literally covered it. He had been hit with anything they could hurt that kid with. That was one memorable case. Another was a family of 12 kids, all mistreated or taught to mistreat by their dad. And yes, the mother knew but didn't care. She would openly brag about how much welfare money she was getting from her 12-pack of victims. Stupid as crap and smelled about as nice, too. The kids were, this was years ago, not taken from the home because they were an open protective case. There was no place to put them and not enough evidence to convict the dad. One child turned up in summertime with man-hand-shaped bruises on her inner thighs that you could see outside of her grubby, overly short shorts that barely fit her. The parents were questioned. The kid was questioned. Both told the same story. She fell off her bike. Amazing how falling off a bike gives you dad's hand-sized handprints in your flesh. The mother came to her daughter's daycare worker who reported the kid's injuries and gloated that they couldn't get the dad. It was surreal and beyond sickening. You know what? I hope the dad is no longer alive. Story 20. Some of them are not my case, but from my country. Failed termination. The dad fired at mom, then fired himself in front of the children. Mom survived and had to be interviewed with injuries. Baby dipped in the toilet and was harmed by mom's boyfriend. Boyfriend put baby in bouncer and leaves. The 4-year-old was left home alone with the baby for who knows how long. Mom left 2 kids in the Walmart parking lot. Substance falls out of her pocket in the police station. 4-year-old stated, "That's my mommy's. She eats that." The house so dirty I had to run outside and retch. My throat and eyes burned for hours from the ammonia from dog whiz in the air. The children had such bad lice the bugs could be seen without even parting the hair. There was a cat in the children's room under a pile of clothes. Story 21. I work in the UK as part of the local Safeguarding Children board for my country. So I often see the worst cases coming across my desk. I think the worst one is tied between two at the moment. One is a historic mistreatment case, where two people mistreated about 20 to 30 people across 20 years, giving them substances, etc. They were recently jailed for 18 years each, which was a good result. The other was a young lad who was locked away in a room with nothing in it other than a bedraggled blanket. The poor lad got so upset and was so pestered that when the police went in, they found the walls smeared in mess. The place was horrendous. The parents also encouraged all of his siblings to use him as a punching bag and actively rewarded them for attacking him. Thankfully, we found out due to his little sister speaking to a teacher who allowed us to rescue him from that situation. He's doing much better now and is enjoying his time in school with his placement family. In terms of child passing, you see some sad ones and you see some unfortunate ones. You see the fallout from the incident, how it affected others. Emotions run high and you're sitting there trying to support the family, teachers, friends, etc. It must be really tough. Story 22. Not a CPS worker, but my adopted family has adopted 6 kids. Just wanted to say, anyone thinking of adopting, please consider older kids, not babies. My parents have only adopted older kids. They're looked over in the system. Nobody wants them. They fall victim. I thought about adding a story about my adopted brother and sister, but decided against it. It was the biggest settlement against the state in history to date that was horrific. I can tell you a bit about me. I was 13 and nowhere to go. I was a good kid, but a bit angry at adults. They got me through it, and I'm a fully functioning, successful adult now with no issues. In fact, my son, husband, myself, and my other adopted family are having breakfast in about 3 hours to celebrate Mother's Day. So that's it. Please consider adopting or fostering an older kid. They may have issues you'll have to get through with them, but it'll be so worth it. My family has literally saved the lives of 6 kids. Without them, we would have all very different outcomes. Story 23. I can't imagine having to deal with any of this on a daily basis, and God help anyone who ever does my kid wrong, even a fraction of how bad some of these stories are. I read an article today about a baby, 11 days old, I believe, living 2 hours from me, give or take. Baby passed away from coding. Autopsy hasn't even been performed yet, but it's been reported as clearly obvious that the level of substance in the baby is miles higher than what could have been obtained by breastfeeding, and for such a short time, no less. I had to go retch. How? I just can't put myself in that frame of mind, I guess, and that's definitely a good thing. I sure am glad for the workers who are able to stomach this crap storm on a daily basis and not lose their ever-loving minds, because it's definitely not something everyone can do. Kudos. If you've ever played a role in helping a child, CPS, teaching, fostering, anything, all the props to you. Story 24. Not CPS, but a pediatric nurse who has cared for hundreds of neglected kids. The 3 worst I've seen are a 12-year-old girl who was starved and put in an old refrigerator for punishment. She lost both feet to infection. A 9-month-old, yes, old boy who was mistreated by mom's boyfriend and almost passed away. A 6-year-old who was found in a cage. He didn't speak words of any kind and was absolutely feral. Starved to look like he was about 4. Huge bruise from a boot kick to the side. 9-year-old who had been through cruel parents, cruel foster parents, and finally, a cruel adoptive family. All these kids were saved and safe in our care, and I hope every day doing better with a second chance at life. Why do you adopt kids and be cruel? That's so stupid. Story 25. I'm not CPS. In fact, I had a lot of disdain for CPS after this. Without going into details about how I knew these people, there was a woman who had been living in filthy living conditions. She had a 7-year-old, and she was always talking about how bad he was. She smoked some other substance, and I would physically see stuff and whatnot. The living room table, in plain sight, and definitely within reach of a 7-year-old. The woman was so out of her mind that you couldn't tell if she was 25 or 55. She had no food in the house, ever. I'd brought her groceries more than once. The constant screaming and yelling with this kid, and I don't doubt she probably hit him. She would punish him for doing basic things, i.e. getting up in the middle of the night to whiz and then subsequently whizzing to bed because he wasn't allowed to get up. They couldn't play outside. She would lock him in closets, and she would punish him by keeping him home from school. I reported her to CPS. Twice. Both times I was spoken to like I was wasting their time and should mind my own business. Someone goes to the home and investigates. The house is filthy, no substances inside at the time. The only good in the house was an expired half-gallon of milk and a box of stale crackers. Nothing was done. I wasn't the only one. Neighbors had reported her after hearing the screaming and yelling, things being thrown. Nothing was done. Checked in the years since then to see if she's ever been arrested. Nothing. At least not in the realm of child cruelty or anything. She has, however, been arrested for various types of theft, substance possession, and so on. I just don't understand it. It's like everyone involved was legitimately brain damaged and didn't see how she wasn't fit to be a parent. She had a hamster living in that house in better conditions than her own son. It really gave me the impression that CPS didn't want to deal with him. Maybe the child was too difficult. Who knows? The only people who can do anything didn't do anything. How messed up is that? Story 26. I've been qualified as a social worker for 2 years now in the UK, and I've worked for the past 10 years with vulnerable young people in some way, shape, or form. You learn very quickly not to become fazed by these things. I could give very similar stories to all these examples, as could any social worker. The only time I've been shaken by a case was when I got a call from a doctor in the closest clinic to my office. The GP had a 2-year-old girl in a surgery for flu-like symptoms. Upon examining the child, he discovered that every single one of their teeth were black with rot. The mom thought it was appropriate to feed the baby with nothing but Coca-Cola and chocolate. That was the easiest case of immediate and emergency removal I'd ever taken. What? Story 27. My mom taught many years in an inpatient psychiatric facility. Some of the kids she worked with couldn't go home because they were a danger to their families. Some tried to terminate siblings, one tried to harm their parents. Some were seriously mentally ill, as in talking to people who were outside the window on the second floor. Some had just been horribly mistreated. The worst was a girl whose mother had kept her in a dog crate and fed her dog food, only letting her out long enough to be mistreated by men who paid her mother substance money. Mom taught kindergarten to 2nd grade. Story 28. My oldest child, a boy who is 13 now, is seeing an offender counselor. Through counseling, we've discovered he was a victim at his dad's house, older stepbrother. It's done a world of good for him and us to know and understand why he behaved the way he did. He went to 4 other counselors before he acted out and was court-ordered to counseling. I think there's such a huge gap for care for the perpetrator. It's all about punishment. But he was a victim too, and no one is pursuing actions against his oppressor. I mean, victims in general are terribly underserved. But if the oppressor is also a child who is also a victim, there is almost nothing available. Story 29. I wasn't a CPS worker, but I was a case manager for some time. During the Arctic freeze a few years ago, this woman had entered the office asking for medical help or insurance and such, as it appeared to be a mild emergency. She was homeless, living in her car with her toddler, and was attacked and mistreated and was now potentially pregnant. As the government had cut hotel vouchers for the state and the hospitals to give out, we legally could not allow her to go back out into the cold to sleep in the car with a kiddo. CPS was notified and the kiddo was potentially going to be taken away. Truly heartbroken all around. The staff rallied around and worked with a CPS worker to see the legality of us helping slush fund a room at this hotel across the street. We could, but there were lots of stipulations about the child. I paid my part, helped figure out her insurance and the kids, and that's the last I saw of it. Story 30. I'm not a CPS worker, but I am a foster parent. I have twins in my care who are 3. The mom has had a case open with the various counties she has lived in since 2009. She has a total of 6 kids and another on the way. The 2 oldest live with their bio dad since she lost custody of them a long time ago. The twins' 2 other siblings live a few miles from us at another foster family home. The children were removed due to neglect and being around users. The night they were taken, the neighbors called the police because the 2 of the children were left with known felons while mom took the other 2 children to court with her own retail theft charges. The children who were at home were covered in mess and hadn't eaten in days. We struggle daily with the children we have because they show major signs of PTSD. They sneak food out of the trash and lie about everything. They're developmentally and intellectually underdeveloped. They don't even know how to clap. It breaks my heart every day to see the struggle they go through. Here's an interesting fact about this family. Mom and dad don't get along. They split up when the youngest was born. Dad is engaged to a woman who is a kid with the mom's now fiancé. So basically, they switched partners. The mom is pregnant with her fiancé's baby. We aren't even sure if the twins have the same father since she stated that she slept with multiple people at the same time and they're fraternal. All of the children have issues, and we've been working hard to get them the help they need. We have court next month to see if they will stay in our care. The county doesn't seem to care about anything but reunification, and that bothers me. At the last visit with Dad, he was spiked. The last test was over 6 months ago for both bio parents because either they couldn't produce or they refused. And yet they want to reunify them. The whole system sucks. Story 31. No, I do not regret leaving the job. I do understand that it is best for parents or relatives to raise their own children. Many children in foster care move around a lot. For each move they make, they fall behind at least 6 months in school. They don't form parental bonds or sibling bonds. In most cases, reunification either doesn't happen or if it does, the children end up back in the system. I did everything I could to prevent those kids from going back to that house. I wish I had more positive things to say about the child welfare system, but I don't. I've seen amazing foster parents, and I've witnessed adoptions of the most troubled kids by loving, giving people. But I cannot be part of something where I'm certain another child will end, and most likely that passing could have been prevented. I'm not jaded. I'm a realist. Story 32. Not a CPS worker, but I clean pools, so it's close enough. I was cleaning a pool at a house, and the family that lived there had some eclectic friends. The friends' family lived in an old school bus parked in the property. It wasn't really renovated or anything, just boards over the windows. They had 2 dogs and 2 young daughters. I rarely saw the daughters with a full set of clothes on, and they never seemed clean. I don't know where they went, but I hope the best for those 2 little girls. Story 33. I'm not a CPS worker. In fact, I'm still 14, but I had a friend who dealt with him multiple times, and they had done nothing for her. A few weeks ago, I was going to intensive outpatient therapy at a residential facility called Great Circle. A girl that I'd gone there with a few times, let's call her Hope, came in one day crying. When we took a break and went outside, she sat all by herself, so I went over to ask what was wrong. She said that she didn't want to talk about it, so I told her that was all right and that I would listen if she changed her mind. After a few minutes, she finally confessed that her mom was doing substance at home. I was shocked. I asked her if anybody knew. She said she had told people, but they had called her a liar and thought she was just some kid looking for attention. This infuriated me. Are you serious? Nobody would say something like that for attention. Maybe some people, but Hope was not the type to do that. I was very gentle with her and coaxed her to tell somebody at Great Circle. She finally gave in, and we got the group leader's attention. I grabbed one of the other employees, and she brought us to a room in the back so Hope could talk. I came with her for support. She told her that her mom had been doing substances at home and that nobody believed her. We talked about it for a bit until my therapist came in. She was also Hope's therapist. I got sent back out while she tearfully told the rest of the story. Eventually, my therapist took me aside and thanked me for encouraging her to let somebody know. She asked me about what she had told me until Hope's grandmother arrived. She had to talk to the grandmother, so Hope and I went outside with everybody else to wait for pickup. My mom came to pick me up, and the whole car ride home, I was worried about her and praying that things got better for Hope. The next session, Hope came in smiling, and she said she had a great weekend, and things had gone better. Things were still being worked out, but she knew that her mom would get help and get better. Next week, she was gone. I was informed that she had graduated from the program, meaning she was discharged. Story 34. CPS worker from Denmark here. The one that sticks out the most was the last case I was involved with at my first job. The family had just moved to our district, and a colleague asked if I wanted to help out, so I sat down and read the case file. I immediately went into my colleague's office and asked if she had read the file. She had not had the time to do so yet. And the papers we had gotten from the previous district said that when this girl was 3, she had been by her mom several times. The mom was intoxicated. The girl was discovered in a daycare sitting in a corner rocking back and forth. The former CPS worker wrote that she felt paralyzed because of the amount of worrying information that kept coming her way, and she was relieved when the girl's dad came and took her home with him. He was a known user. I contacted the girl's new school, and they informed me that they were writing a note to us as we spoke because the girl had shown another girl from her class corn. When I told my colleague this, you could see her getting paler by the minute. We decided right there to go home to the family. No one was home that day. This was a Thursday. Monday morning, I got an email from the hospital saying that the girl's aunt was taking care of her because the father had taken a coating, but he did not pass away. We went back to the family's house and found the aunt cleaning the place. He told her to stop, and what we found was a living home. Filth was everywhere we found. Substances within easy reach of a child and used syringes. The girl was 6 at the time. She was placed in foster care right away. From the time I read the case file and until she was placed in foster care, it was about 3 weeks. Story 35. This happened in the 80s during the child cruelty witch trials. When I was a child, I was called out of class to the principal's office. The man I didn't recognize was also there. Turned out that he was a detective, and he was there because they got a call that my older brother was mistreating me. For your information, he wasn't. The officer took me from school and drove me across county lines to a hospital. Once there, a lady began to ask me questions and asked me to touch the doll where my brother touched me. When I kept telling them my brother never hurt me, they started to interrogate me as if I was a criminal. I was a young child. When I started to cry, I was screamed at and told, "You wouldn't be crying if you didn't do it." The entire experience was severely traumatizing. They finally gave up and drove me home late that afternoon. When we arrived at my house, my parents were seriously distraught and beside themselves. Why, you might ask? Because they thought I was taken when I didn't show up for my bus to the after-school daycare. No one knew where I was, or more importantly, they wouldn't say. Turns out that my parents weren't told about any of this until the detective returned me to them. And my principal was explicitly told if he said anything to them or anyone else, he'd be arrested. My parents were overjoyed at first, thinking a cop found me, but when they found out what really happened, they went berserk. I can't blame them at all. What's even worse, apparently, the call was made by a kid my brother had gotten into a fight with the day before. It was revenge. This was during the hysteria after the Adam Walsh case and the Great Crusade to save the children, when stranger danger was taught to young students. before the realization that most cruelty is done by family members or people known by the family, and this before cops and hospital personnel knew how to interview a child. I was terribly traumatized from all this, and to this day, if I were to drive by that hospital, I get flashbacks. I refuse to ever go there. I no longer live in that town, but my family does. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.